Welcome to another fun project with the Granny Stitch. Today we're going to be working on the Gemstone blanket. This is a really fun Granny Stitch colorwork blanket. I'm going to show you how to carry your colors and do each of these sections. And I'm going to be doing these sections separately today. We'll talk about that in a minute. But this is a really fun, easy, and rewarding project to just take those granny stitches to the next level and add some colorwork pop to it. So if you love the granny stitches and you love making scrap blankets or anything else, you'll really enjoy this project. Let's talk about the supplies. For this blanket, I use the Lion Brand Color Theory. These are amazing colors. These are super squishy and soft. It's a 4 worsted weight yarn. If you're using a yarn substitute, be sure to check the gauge. But we are using the ivory, the tourmaline, the Himalayan salt, and the Canyon for this blanket. But I have some color suggestions in the ad-free PDF pattern talking about different colors you might want to use, different combinations. Another combination that I also like is something like this, using those tweeds, maybe pull in some pinks and darker colors with it. And this will change the mood completely, adding a different look to it. So don't be afraid to substitute. In the pattern, I have labeled a lot of the colors A, B, C, and D to make that substitution a bit easier. So that way you can substitute, the color blue for the color purple, but we're just, going to call it a letter to make that easier. You'll also want a 5.5 crochet hook. This one is from Mary Maxim. It's a really nice wooden hook. Be sure to check your gauge once again. Now, gauge isn't as important when it comes to a blanket because it's not a fitted item. So if you really don't want to, you do not have to. But if you want it to size the same as in the written pattern, you'll want to check that gauge with the gauge swatch. You'll also want a couple stitch markers to mark the ends of your row because that's important to not lose stitch count, and then some scissors. Let's go ahead and we're going to jump on into how I'm going to be doing this project on camera today. Now, I just moved into a new home and these colors match what I have going on in my kitchen right now with a little bit of decor. So I thought it would be fun to do each section as a dishcloth that I can later use. So if you aren't sure if you want to make this blanket yet, or you want to do a swatch to see how you like the colors and the way that they work up, feel free to grab some cotton yarn. You can use this as a dishcloth later. I am going down on hook size for the dishcloths because this is a little bit of a thinner yarn and I want it a bit tighter. So I'm going to go down to a 4.5 for this. And we are going to be making just a square. I'm going to be doing the color work for each section of this so we can walk through that, but I'll be doing them just in swatches that can be used as a multi-purpose. Now, I want to take a moment to talk about the ad-free PDF because there are some great resources in this and it can be purchased on Etsy or Ravelry. When it comes to substituting yarns, I have these charts that are blank that will help you substitute to a different color than what I had originally in the pattern. And I'm going to be doing some substituting today when I work up these dishcloths. So you'll simply take a crayon or coloring pencil and you're going to color in whatever substitute you wanted for the color that I had originally done. And this will help you visualize on the chart what substitutions you are using, especially if you're using completely different colors like some pinks or purples or greens. It's really hard sometimes to look at a chart and visualize that when there are different colors on a chart. So I have the original charts and the patterns where these are completely full of the coloring for the original color choices, but I also have this option as well as an added bonus to the ad-free PDF. Now for this first section of colorwork, I'm not going to be doing the entire width of the blanket. If you are doing the entire width of the blanket, you are going to chain 166 stitches. But this can be adjusted in multiples of 12 plus 10 for the width of this blanket. I will give you some tips too if you didn't want to make it as long, so you want to make this a little bit shorter. You can also take out some of those rows that are the color A, where we just have some spots for the color A, and that can also shorten the length of it as well if you want to make this a little bit smaller than what I have written, but that adjustment is completely up to you. So for this washcloth though, I have started by chaining 46. So even if you're working the blanket here, the same instructions will apply. I'm just not doing them across an entire row that's super long. So now that I have chained 46, we're going to be working into the very first chain from the hook. We're going to be doing a stacked single crochet, which means we do not need a turning chain. I'm going to go right into that first hump, so the underside of that first chain, and then we're going to yarn over and pull that loop through, yarn over and pull through both. And yes, we've just done a single crochet, but we're not done yet. We're going to go back through this left bar here, insert our hook, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then yarn over and pull through 2 again. This is a stacked single crochet. This is a great stitch for straighter edges, but you do want to go ahead right now and grab a stitch marker. This will make your life much easier if you are using stacked single crochets. So we're going to place a stitch marker right into that first stitch of the row. If you don't use a stitch marker, especially getting started with the stacked single crochet, you might work around the side of the stitch on this edge, and we don't want that. That would add stitches. And then we are simply going to be double crocheting into each chain all the way across. So when we get to the end of this row, we will still have 46 stitches. So double crochet in the remaining chains all the way across. Now, after doing our setup row of double crochet stitches for this pattern, we are going to start row 1 with the color work, working from that color work chart. So we're still keeping color A, and we're going to turn our work. And this will be the longest stretch of float we will be doing for this pattern, and that is on this row 1. So we're going to start right off the bat with probably the most complicated part of this pattern, but once you get through this row, then you'll realize this is not all that bad. So we'll start by doing a stacked single crochet into the very first stitch. And then we're going to be working between the next 2 spaces. Once again though, whenever working those stacked single crochets, it's a good idea to throw a stitch marker into that first stitch of the row. Now after our first stitch, we're going to be looking at between the first and the second stitch of this row, and we're going to be doing 2 double crochets between those stitches. This will start to form our granny groups. And now we're going to skip 3 stitches, and between the next 2, we will do 3 double crochets. And then we're going to do that one more time. We're going to skip 3 stitches and working between them, 3 double crochets. Now this is where we are going to be changing colors. I'm going to be going to the color B on the next granny group. So whenever you're changing colors, you can see how we're starting to form those granny groups there. But now we need to change colors, and I've stopped on my very last yarn over. This will make for a clean color transition. I'm going to go ahead and put my color A to the back of my work. We're going to bring in the color B, leaving a tail to weave in later. We're going to yarn over with the color B and pull through the last 2 loops of that last stitch of that granny group. And now we've changed colors and completed this granny group, and we're ready to work the next granny group. So we'll skip the next 3 stitches and do 3 double crochets between the next. And now we're going to be changing back to the color A. So we're going to drop the color B to the back of our work. And on that last yarn over, we're just going to bring our color A, letting it float on the back. We're not going to be pulling this tight. We're just going to yarn over and pull through those last 2 loops. And now we're going to be working the color A again. So we are going to skip the next 3 stitches. And we'll do the group of 3 between the next 2. And when it comes to doing these repeats, when you're looking at the chart, the repeats are done between 2 red lines. So let me grab the chart for the second section. That's one I have close to me. But whenever you're doing repeats, these red lines indicate the repeat between them that you will be doing. And that's so that we start and finish our row cleanly. And we know what we're repeating between there because we'll have a lot more stitches between the start and the finishing point of each row. So for what we are working on currently, we're in our repeat. I'm going to do another one of these. So we're going to skip 3 and do another granny group. And then this is where our repeat will start over on the written instructions as well as on the chart. So at the end of this next stitch, this is where the repeat ends. So the repeat for this starts here and ends here. It's 4 granny groups. That's the repeat. So now we're going to repeat this again. We'll do a granny group in the color A, the color B, and then the color A and the color A for those granny groups. So we're going to skip 3, do a granny group in the color A, and now we're going to switch to the color B. So we're going to drop the color A behind our work and pull up the color B. Now this is a very, very long float. We're going to be catching this float on the next row, and I'll show you how to do that. But what you want to do is you don't want to pull it too tightly. You want this not to be like super loose, but you want to be able to get your fingers in there and make sure it's not too tight that it's going to cause any like puckering or pulling on the front. You want it to sit quite nicely, and we'll catch this on the next row and like tighten it down so that's not such a long float. And now we're going to skip 3 and do a granny group with the color B. And now we're going to go back to the color A. We're going to drop the color B to the back of our work and pick up the color A. And now we're going to skip 3 and do a granny group. And then once again, we're going to skip 3 and do a granny group. And this is going to be the repeat all the way across. So we've got our first granny group in the color A, our second granny group in the color B, and then 2 more granny groups in the color A. That's our repeat all the way across until we get to the last 6 stitches of this row. And now that I am to the last 6 stitches of this row, so we've completed those repeats working them across, I'm going to skip 3 stitches and do 1 more granny group. And then we're going to skip the next 2 stitches, and in the very last stitch, we'll remove our stitch marker and double crochet into that last stitch. Now, we are changing back to the color B because we are starting the next row with the color B. So before I finish the very last stitch of this row, I'm going to go ahead and float that color B across, yarn over, and pull through with the new color. That way, after this row, I am set up to work the next row starting with the color B. So for row 2, we are going to turn our work. And this is the wrong side of our work. This is where we're going to be seeing all of our floats, which is totally fine. And this first chart is probably one of the more complicated ones in this pattern. So once you get past this, the rest will be easy going for you. All right, here we go. So for the very first stitch in this row, we are going to be starting with a stacked single crochet. And then you can mark it if you like. And then we're going to be doing 2 more double crochets in that first space. So now we've created these spaces in between these granny groups, and it's much easier to see where we want to be placing our stitches. Now, we need to be changing back to the color A, and to do so, we are going to leave the tail end of our work to the front, not the back. We're going to leave it to the front this time, so it's always going to be on the wrong side of the work. And then we are going to yarn over and pull through with the color A. And now in the next space, we are going to be working another granny group, but we will be working over this strand B, so the color B. We're going to work underneath it, making sure that when we work into that space, the color B is above where we are working, and we're going to do a granny group. And then we're going to do that again for the next space. But I just want to note this is where our color repeat will begin, is in this next space. And so this will be the beginning of our 4 granny group repeat. So in the next space, we're going to do a granny group. But we will be changing to the color B here. So on the very last stitch of this granny group, we're going to leave the work to the front, leave the strand to the front of our work, pick up the color B, and yarn over and pull through with the color B. Sometimes I have to kind of adjust my stitches a little bit once I've changed colors. And now for the next 2 granny groups, we're going to be using the color B. Still working over any of those floats. It really helps lock those in. So now you can see this is the float from this row, but the previous row float is really tucked in there nicely. And now we're going to be switching back to the color A at the end of this granny group. So we're going to drop the color B to the front of our work and pick up the color A. And now we're going to be working a granny group with the color A, and once again working so that we are locking in those floats. They won't be as long. They're not going to catch on your fingers because we are locking those in to these stitches when we work them. Now, this is the repeat here for this row. So once we did our starting stitches, then we began our repeat, which is the color A, and then work 2 granny groups of the color B, and then work the granny group of the color A. So let's repeat that again. So that would be the color A for a granny group. And then we're going to switch to the color B. I'm going to drop the color A to the front of our work and pick up the color B. And now we're going to work 2 granny groups with the color B. And now we're going to drop the color B to the front of our work and pick up the color A. And now we're going to work 1 granny group with the color A. And then that's our repeat across. So repeat that color work section all the way across until we get to the last 6 stitches of this row. Now at the last 6 stitches of row 2, we are going to be working one more group in the color A. And then for the last stitch of this row, we're going to be changing to the color B. We'll remove our stitch marker and do 1 double crochet in the last stitch of the row. Now after row 2, we are going to turn our work for row 3 of the color work. Now for row 3 of the color work, we're going to start by doing a stacked single crochet. And then we're going to do 2 crochets into that very first space. And then we're going to be changing colors here. We're going to drop our yarn to the back of our work because we are now having the right side facing us. So we always want the floating yarn to be on the wrong side. And we're going to pull up the color A. And then we're going to work 1 granny group with the color A. Now, when you are working with the right side facing you, be sure on the back side that you are working over that float as well. You're going to be working underneath it when you insert your hook. So you want to make sure that that float is being trapped inside the bottom of these stitches so that it's nice and clean. Now, after that 1 granny group, we are going to change back. So we're going to drop our yarn to the back of our work, pull up the color B, yarn over there. And now the next 3 granny groups will be worked in the color B. And this is the start of our 4 granny group repeat for this row. So we're going to do 3 granny groups in the color B. And now we're going to go back to the color A. So we're going to drop the color B to the back of our work and pull up the color A. And now we're going to do one granny group in the color A. And then we'll be switching back to the color B for that stitch pattern repeat. Now we will be working that stitch pattern repeat, working this 4 granny group repeat. So 3 granny groups with the color B, 1 granny group with the color A. We're going to repeat that all the way across until the last 6 stitches of this row. Now at the end of row 3, we are going to be working 1 more granny group with the color A. And then we're going to simply do 1 double crochet in the last stitch of this row. Now for row 4, we're getting kind of lucky here, but we are going to be working the entire row with the color B. This means that we need to fasten off the color A, so go ahead and fasten off your color A and set it aside. It will come back in just a moment, but we can set that aside for a little while, and we are going to be working row 4. I'm going to turn my work, and with color A, stack single crochet into the very first stitch, and then do 2 double crochets into that first space. And then we are simply going to do granny groups into each space across, being sure to pick up those floats, and then we'll double crochet in the very last stitch of this row. So we're working this entire row in one solid color B. Now after row 4, we're going to turn our work. And then we are going to be working on row 5. And for row 5, we're going to start by working our color B with a stacked single crochet and then 2 double crochets into that very first space. And then we're going to do a granny group in the next space. So 3 double crochets. And then we're going to be starting our repeat. So we're not changing colors yet, but this is going to be the 4 granny group repeat for this row. So it will be a granny group in the color B. And then we're going to switch to our color C. So get your color C, whichever color you have chosen for color C. And then we're going to bring that in here, and we're going to do 1 granny group with the color C. And then we're going to switch back to the color B, and we're going to be dropping our color C to the back side of our work because we're keeping all of our floats on the wrong side. And now we're going to be doing 2 granny groups into the next 2 spaces, and that's our 4 granny group stitch repeat. So once again, the repeat across for row 5 is to do 1 granny group with the color B, 1 granny group with the color C, and 2 granny groups with the color B. And you'll repeat that all the way across until the last 6 stitches of this row. Now for the last 6 stitches, we're going to go to the next space and do a granny group with the color B. So we're keeping it in the color B here. And then our last stitch of our row will also be in the color B. However, if you want to do a really long float, if you're comfortable doing a long float, you can carry the color C and yarn over on that last yarn over before pulling through for that last stitch. If this is too long of a float for you, if this makes you uncomfortable, feel free to fasten off and then you can always reattach. But we're starting the very next row with the color C, so this will help us get set up for that row. Now I'm going to turn my work, and for row 6, we're going to be starting with a stacked single crochet into the first stitch, and then 2 double crochets into that very first space. And now we're going to change colors, so we're going to bring our color C up from the front. We're going to drop our color our color B. We're going to drop our color C to the front. We're going to grab our color B, and you can carefully float this across if you want. Once again, if these floats make you nervous or you don't like floating diagonally there, you can always fasten off and reattach. And now with the color B, we are going to do 2 granny groups, being sure to grab that color C, that long float, if you did do that long float, so that this stays on the front of your work, but we're working over it. And then we'll do one more granny group with the color B. And then we'll do one more granny group with the color B. And then we'll be ready to switch back to the color C. So bringing my strand to the front of my work and grabbing the color C and looping over, making sure that this float right here is not too tight. And now for the next 2 granny groups, we will be working the color C. And after working those 2 granny groups, we're going to switch back to the color B. And do one more here for the repeat. So the repeat for this row, the 4 granny group repeat, will be 1 granny group with the color B, 2 granny groups with the color C, and then 1 granny group with the color B. So this is our stitch pattern repeat here. It's the B, C, C, B in those granny groups. We'll work those all the way across until the last 6 stitches of this row. And now for the last 6 stitches of the row, we're going to work the next space with the color A, doing those granny groups, and then we're going to change to the color C and do the last stitch, the top of that stacked single crochet with the color C. But we're switching right back to the color A for the next row. Now after row 6, everything for this design part of this is a repeat of what we've just done. So we're basically taking this and we're mirroring it, but we're just repeating rows. So for rows 7 through 11, we're going to be repeating rows that we already have done here so that this is just mirrored, but we've already gone over those instructions. So I'm going to work up the rest of this design off camera. Now I'm on row 11, which row 11 will be worked in one solid color all the way across in our color A. And this will complete the color chart portion of this. Now, if you are doing the blanket, you will continue to do the color A for rows 12 through 14 as well before starting the next color section. But since I'm making a washcloth here, I'll want it bigger. So I'm going to continue to work the color A until I have the height I want on this washcloth, and then we'll move on to the border. We'll get to the border later. It will be the same for each item I'm making today in the sections as well as for the blanket. So this completes the Colorwork section 1. Now we're ready for section 2 of the colorwork of the blanket. If you're working the blanket, you will have just finished the first 14 rows, and now you're ready to start over with section 2, but you're just going to keep on going with one solid piece. For these washcloths I'm showing on camera to demonstrate the stitch repeats, I've done a few rows keeping the stitch count at 46, and I've worked that granny stitch, and now I'm ready to start section 2. So when we start section 2, we are starting with row 1 on this next row. So row 1 of the colorwork of section 2. Now I'm switching up the colors a little bit for section 2 for my washcloths. I am using this cream as color A. My color B will be this blue, the color C is going to be this brown, and the color D is going to be this burnt orange. So this is my color A for section 2 that I'm working on camera, but your colors might be different, and that's okay. We're just going to call them the A, B, C, D because that helps us versus the color name. So with my color A, I have just finished the previous row, and I'm going to, on my very last stitch, because we're switching colors to set ourselves up for row 1 of section 2, I'm going to switch to the color D. And then I'm going to turn my work. And I'm going to start with the color D for row 2. And this is the right side of our work. So the wrong side will be on the back side, and that's where we'll be carrying any of these floats. Now I've done a stack single crochet in the first, and I'll do 2 more double crochets in that space. And now I'm going to be switching back to my color A for the next granny group. And this is going to be our stitch repeat all the way across. It's quite simple. We'll do 1 granny group in the color A. And then we'll do the next granny group with the color D. So we're just switching back and forth between these colors for section 2, row 1, and doing every other stitch. We're carrying our yarn on the back of our work because this is our right side. I'm going to repeat this all the way across until the last stitch of this row. Now for the last stitch on row 1 for the second section of color work, we're ending with the color A, and then we're going to immediately change back to the color D because this next row starts with the color D. You can go ahead and fasten off the color A because we won't be using it for a little while. We're going to turn our work, and for row 2 of the second section of color work, we will be working the color D all the way across. So you're working those granny groups all the way across in solid color D. Be sure to catch those floats as you work across to make the wrong side of your work a lot more tidy. Now at the end of row 2, we are going to join with the color C and turn our work. And for row 3, we will start with a stack single crochet in the color C. And then we will do 2 double crochets into that first space. So just like all the other rows, we're starting the same, but then we're going to be switching back to the color D, and this will float and carry on the back side of our work. Switching back to D. Now our repeat for row 3 is to do 1 granny group in the color D, and then change to the color C and do 1 granny group in the color C. And that is our repeat across. We're just going to be doing every other again, changing back and forth all the way across until we get to the last stitch of the row, which will be a double crochet with the color D. Now we are going to end row 3 with a double crochet in the last stitch, and then we're going to be switching to the color C. We can go ahead and fasten off our color D. We no longer need it. And now for row 4, we're going to turn our work, and we are going to work the entire row with the color C. So we're not doing any color changes again. We're just going to work the entire row with color C, doing those granny groups. Now at the end of row 4, we are going to grab our color B and yarn over that last yarn over to set us up to start row 5. Now row 5 is going to start with the color B, doing that stacked single crochet into that first stitch, and then 2 double crochets into that first space. And then we're going to be changing back to the color C, and our repeat across will be to do a granny group of the color C, and then a granny group of the color B. So once again, just as we did previous rows, we're just working different colors, but we're going every other stitch all the way across, and then we will end this row with a double crochet in the color C, but then we'll be switching back to the color B at the end as well, because the next row I'm going to do off camera since we've seen this several times now. For row 6, we will just be doing the color B in a solid color. Now for row 7, I have switched back to the color A. I fastened off the color C once I no longer needed that. We still have the color B attached, and now I'm working that stack single crochet and 2 double crochets in that first space with the color A. And now we're going to grab the color B, and we're going to be working the same thing we have done like since all the odd rows 1, 3, and 5. And we're going to be going every other granny group now with every other color. So the color B for a granny group, and then we'll be dropping that to the back and working the color A for the next granny group. And that is our repeat across for row 7, just working back and forth between the colors B and the color A. Now at the end of row 7, we're going to switch back to the color A after working that last double crochet and fasten off the color B. We are now ready to do some repeats of the color A for this blanket. So for the blanket, we're going to turn our work, and for rows 8 all the way through row 26, we're going to work with the color A. So it's a long stretch of color A. I will give you a tip. If you did want to shorten the length of this blanket, you can take out some rows between rows 8 and 26. Just be sure to work an even number of rows so that we keep the right side and the wrong side the same throughout. So that is a way to shorten the blanket. If you're working a washcloth, you're simply going to work row 8 until you have the size that you desire for your washcloth. So this will complete that zigzag look, and you'll just simply do a lot of rows in your color A until you get to the next section or you are done with your washcloth. Now that we've done the first 2 sections together, I'm going to talk about the rest of the sections because it's simply using the skills we've already done. There will be no more surprises or skills to be taught for the rest of this blanket, so we're just going to talk about it. Now this is the section 3. The section 3 looks different than 1 and 2, but it's just these diamonds. Now the techniques and skills we use are the exact same ones from the zigzag. So for the diamonds, the only difference is the placements, but you'll be doing a row where we have every other granny group worked, and then a solid row of granny groups, and then a row of every other granny group worked, solid, and then every other solid. So every other row is simply working that color work, and it's quite simple to do. It's just which colors we start the row with that create these diamond shapes. And then these diamonds shift slightly back and forth as we work them. So you'll work quite a few of these. Just another tip, if you wanted to shorten the length of the blanket, you could also play around with these diamonds and the coloring and placement of them to shorten it. So this is section 3 of this, and I've also made a washcloth with it. If you wanted to make a washcloth, I started by doing 4 rows of the color A, and then I ended with 4 solid rows of the color A with 3 repeats of this color work in between. Now, all of the washcloths that I have created with these to do these swatches are a total of 25 rows. So I simply did the designs on the first 2, and then I just kept going until I had a total of 25 rows. And then for this one, like I said, I started with 4 and ended with 4 in solid between these diamonds. Now, for sections 4 and 5, so this would be section 3, then you'll have some repeats in the solid for the blanket, the same amount of repeats we had before this section. And then for section 4, we're doing the zigzag again, but because we're working our way across the blanket, the zigzag colors will reverse. So they'll just be opposite so that it matches up that way, just looks symmetrical. So these will be reversed in their order, but all the concepts are still the same. And then the last section, the 5th section, is just a repeat of the first section we did with those larger diamonds at the end. So that is the color work for the blanket. It's all quite easy and simple to do. I love this granny stitch, but it's fun to watch all of these come together. Next, let's talk about your completed blanket or washcloth and what to do about that border. Now for this zigzag washcloth, I have the wrong side facing me for this last row. Now it might be a little bit different on the blanket, but the concepts are the same. So I'm going to grab an alternate color because this will help us really see those stitches versus working this in that cream. And I am going to switch over my last stitch with the alternate color. Now when starting the border, you want to make sure that the right side is facing you. We want to have the right side facing us. So for the border, this is how it is done. We're going to do 2 rounds here, but I learned this technique for the first round that makes it a bit faster. Now in previous videos of blankets or things that I was putting a border on, you'll notice that I would do a slip stitch border first, then I would come back and do a single crochet because it really creates nice clean lines. However, I found a technique this last year that makes this a lot faster. It's almost like we're going to work that slip stitch and single crochet border all at the same time. So I have changed colors, and in this very first stitch, we are going to single crochet. So this is how it's going to start. So we've single crocheted into that very first stitch. Now we're going to go back to this left bar and insert our hook, and then we're going to insert our hook into the next stitch. We're going to yarn over, pull that loop up through the stitch and through that first loop on the hook, and then yarn over and pull through 2. What that's doing is adding a nice clean line along the bottom while we're also completing a single crochet. So once again, we're going to enter that left bar into the next stitch. We're going to yarn over and pull up through that loop and the first loop on the hook, and then yarn over and pull through 2. So into the left bar, into the next stitch, yarn over, pulling through the stitch and the first loop on the hook, yarn over and pull through 2. This is such a clean lined border. You can always use this to edge pretty much anything to have just a nice finish to it. It's just so quick. It's faster than doing slip stitch around and then coming back and single crocheting. So you can see what that looks like. It creates a nice line there that really defines this border edge from the piece, and it's really clean for those stitches to go through. So I'm going to complete this across the top of this, and then I'm going to come back when I get to that corner so we can work around the corner and then work around one of the raw edges. Now when we've worked to one of the corners, we are going to chain 2. This will help those corners be really sharp, and also when we come back to work our next round, we have a space to work into on those corners. Now after chaining 2, we're going to rotate our work. So we're going to be working along this raw edge of this piece of fabric, and we are going to start by single crocheting into the first space on the edge. So we're just kind of starting this over. Then we'll go through that left bar, and then we're going to go into the next space on the edge. Now I'm going to be working about 2 stitches per row along the edge, just keeping it even. But if it starts to pucker or it's too tight, you'll want to either add more stitches per row or maybe do 1 stitch per every 2 rows to like even that out so that it's not too many stitches. So I'm going to insert into the left, go into this next space, yarn over and pull it through the fabric and through that first loop on the hook, and then yarn over and pull through 2. So this is how we're going to work this all the way down. I find that sometimes 3 stitches, oops, didn't enter into that left bar. 3 stitches per every 2 rows can also work if it starts to feel like there's too much fabric. And then sometimes I'll go back to 2 stitches per row. And so it's really just keeping that fabric even. But if you feel like you're starting to kind of bunch up a bit, then for the next row, you can just do 1 stitch per row and then go back to a stitch per 2 rows. It's just making sure that that fabric is laying nicely. Now this cotton is also a little bit less forgiving than an acrylic, I feel like, when it comes to doing edging, but it looks really nice. So we're just going to keep working that all the way around. All of our edges, chaining 2 on the corners, completing that really cool slip stitch single crochet edging until we get back to the beginning. Now that we are all the way back at the beginning, we are going to chain 2 for this corner to make it also nice and clean. and then slip stitch to the very first stitch of this round. Now we're going to work one more round if you want. You don't have to, but I want to work one more round of double crochet. Now this is what this looks like on the blanket. We have our nice clean line, and then we have a double crochet round after that. I think it just looks really pretty. So we are going to start by doing a stacked single crochet into this very first stitch. So I'm going to insert that back in there, doing that stacked single crochet. You can always substitute this with the chain 2 if you want. And then as always, when we're working in the round and doing stuff like this, it's a good idea with those stacked single crochets to throw in a stitch marker to mark the first stitch of the round. Now for the rest of this round, it's going to work out pretty quick and it's quite easy, but we are simply going to be double crocheting into every single stitch all the way around. Now, if you want to add a little bit extra pizzazz to this, because I do like doing this, you can always work those double crochets into that back loop only. And what that would do is that would leave that front loop hanging out. So let me show you the difference here. See how it leaves another line? So you can either do it like this or this. Either one looks great. This is just working those double crochets. This is working the double crochets in the back loop only. And that leaves a double line here, which looks nice, or you can just leave that single line there, which looks nice as well. For this, I think I am going to work the double crochets in the back loop only. I think it looks quite nice. And then when you get to the corners, we're going to be working into those chain 2 spaces. We're going to do 2 double crochets, chain 1, 2 double crochet on that edge. I'll show you that when I get there. Now that we are at the corner, we're going to be working into that chain 2 space. So we're going to do 2 double crochets, and all this is going to be worked into that 1 chain 2 space. And then we will chain 1. I like to tighten that down a little. And then we're still going to be working in the same space. We're going to do 2 more double crochets. And that really helps that corner be nice and sharp and lay even. And now we're just going to complete that all the way around. We're going to be working into every single stitch, double crocheting and doing the 2 double crochet, chain 1, 2 double crochet on the corners into those chain 2 spaces until we get all the way back around. And we will end this by working that 2 double crochet, chain 1, 2 double crochet into that corner stitch, and then just slip stitching to the first stitch of the round and fastening off this beautiful washcloth here. Now, after you've finished your border, you'll want to weave in all of your ends. You can block these if you want to get them to be just right, especially with blankets. I do recommend blocking either with a wet block or just a quick steam will make them look quite nice and finished. And then you have a gorgeous blanket, or if you were doing the washcloths, you have 3 awesome washcloths in the colors of your choice that may match your kitchen. Thank you so much for joining me today. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and come back for more fun projects soon.